Welcome to Bloomberg Law. I'm Pacchia. The Republican presidential primary is now underway, thus kicking off the 2012 election cycle. This, of course, is the first presidential election after the famous/infamous United States Supreme Court decision known as Citizens United came to pass. Joining me now from Washington, D.C. to discuss how the landmark case is affecting the campaign, we're happy to say we have Thom Hartmann, host of the Thom Hartmann Program, and Brad Smith, professor at Capital University School of Law. In a former life, Brad ran the Federal Election Commission. We're happy to have him here. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so we are 2 years after the Citizens United decision. We're launching into a full-blown presidential primary. Thom, this strikes me as a rather crazy Republican primary so far. My question to you is, did Citizens United have a hand in making it this way?
Oh, sure. You had $12.5 million spent in Iowa. I mean, over $100 per vote in some cases. That wouldn't have happened. And much of that money, we have no idea where it came from. I mean, Newt Gingrich himself came out and said, this is a broken system. That wouldn't have happened had it not been for the Citizens United decision.
Right. It's interesting that you pointed out Newt Gingrich. Some are saying that it's ironic that he came out in favor of the decision, and yet he might have found himself at a disadvantage in Iowa precisely because of that decision.
Yep. Yeah, he was all in favor of it when he thought he could raise the money, but then when Mitt Romney outraised him with dark funds, suddenly he was screaming foul.
Brad, as we said before, you spent years working and eventually running the Federal Election Commission. What's your take on this? Has Citizens United had a meaningful impact in the way American politics operate?
Well, it does have a meaningful impact. There's a couple of things. First is Republican Party spending in the Iowa caucuses this year appears to have been lower than it was 4 years ago. So it doesn't appear that we've had this sudden massive increase in spending. We won't have final numbers because the weekend numbers aren't in yet, and obviously campaigns are spending a lot over the weekend. But they were quite a bit lower before that.
Though, that's Republican official party spending.
No, that includes the super PACs as well.
There's no way to know.
Yeah, sure there is. The super PACs have to disclose all of their spending. All of their spending is disclosed under the law, just like any campaign or any PAC. The second thing is that I think we see that it's an excellent thing. For example, let's look at the case now. Rick Santorum can go forward into New Hampshire primarily because it's possible to get money into his campaign quickly thanks to the super PACs that were freed up by Citizens United and SpeechNow.org. Without those two decisions, this campaign would be over because Rick Santorum would have no money to compete in New Hampshire. But he can raise it quickly now thanks to the super PACs.
So, because people can invisibly come in and say, hey, I'm going to give you money and just make sure nobody ever tells.
Again, anybody who's funding a super PAC is disclosed.
It's an issue of transparency.
Well, I don't know why you keep saying transparency. Super PACs disclose all of their donations and all of their expenditures.
No, they don't.
Yes, they do. Thom, they do. It's right in the law.
Karl Rove is running around saying, give me money for global crossing GPS or whatever it is. Because nobody will ever know who you are.
Right. This is a different type of thing. There are many different types of campaign finance organizations.
Okay, so you're talking uniquely about one, super PAC.
I'm talking about super PACs are
a variety of institutions that are putting money in ways that you can't track.
Yeah, but the vast majority of the money is disclosed through super PACs.
Thom, what's your take? Is disclosure an issue still?
I think transparency is the issue, Lee. I think that's the biggest issue here is that what Citizens United has done is it has allowed people to invisibly give money to campaigns and to spend enormous amounts of money in ways that aren't immediately known to the voters.
Thom,
by the time the election is happening, the voters, when the election happened yesterday, the voters did not know who the people were who were funding many of the television ads that were running that market.
Let's get serious. But let's get serious. First, that has been the case in election law for 35 years since the passage of the Federal Election Campaign Act. In other words, reports are not, there's always a little bit of a lag time, so there's always some money that's not available. Secondly, you haven't explained how that would affect or change any of the votes. Do you think Iowans would have changed their votes knowing that, oh, this Santorum ad was paid for by a bunch of Santorum backers? I don't think it would have changed their votes at all.
It might have changed their vote to know that this Santorum ad was paid for by a giant oil corporation. It might have changed their mind to know seriously, people want to know who owns their politicians.
People know Rick Santorum's positions.
No, not necessarily.
Okay. Now let's take this one step further. So people know Rick Santorum's positions. They know these other candidates' positions. Santorum can go on to New Hampshire solely because he can raise money, or others can raise money through a super PAC. Otherwise, his campaign would be over. Mitt Romney is the nominee.
That's nonsense.
This is a wonderful thing about these super PACs. Now,
it's not just the super PACs, Brad. The whole Citizens United, the whole concept of Citizens United, and you well know this. You've read Stephen's dissent. He said his biggest concern with this decision is that it's going to cause cynicism among the citizens, because they're going to realize that there are invisible people out there putting money into the political process that is not traceable, not trackable, and not visible.
Again,
and that's exactly what's happening.
Again, you confuse everything. Citizens United did not change, for example, at all disclosure laws. So disclosure laws are no different than they were before Citizens United. Before Citizens United, George Soros could put a lot of money into a left-wing group. We'll call it the Sierra Club, or we'll call it Americans for Good Things, whatever it wants to be, and nobody would know George Soros was funding that. And you were never on the air decrying that over and over and over.
Until the end of the year when the 990s are filed with the IRS.
Because you knew, but the 990s for the IRS don't disclose those donors. And you knew that didn't really matter to the voters in those days, and that's why you never complained about it. What you're really concerned about now is that you don't want corporations giving it. Why don't you want corporations giving? Because you think they're going to say things that you don't agree with, right?
Actually, I don't want unions to be giving. And I don't want nonprofits to be giving either. I don't think that any artificial entity should be participating in the politics of we the people.
Well, we the people are people. Like, you have a right to speak, I have a right to speak, Lee has a right to speak. The three of us have a right to get together and speak. That's called the right of association, and it's called the right of speech. You can't say that because people join.
We have not created a new person.
Sure we have.
No, you've created a new entity. You know, if you want to go back to Blackstone in the 18th
well, if you want to say
century,
entity
we've created an
person.
artificial person. Well, historically, as you well know, it was artificial persons and natural persons. And much of this is going back to the interpretation of the 14th Amendment, not having the word natural before the word person.
We're not talking about... We're not saying corporations, for example, are people too. We're not saying unions are people too. What we're saying is that corporations and unions are made up of people, and people have rights, and they don't give up those rights just because they join together with others.
Brad, let me jump in here. Brad, my question to you is, how do you reconcile the imbalance between income and influence in our political process?
No, I mean, the Supreme Court has said repeatedly that is not to be resolved by limiting speech. You might try to resolve that through economic regulation, but the bottom line is that...
Such as what? How would you economically regulate this particular issue?
Well, you do things to try to equalize income. You can have a more progressive income tax. You can have more transfer payments. You can do things like that. The bottom line from a speech standpoint is that you cannot, and you do not want the government deciding who has spoken too much and who has spoken too little. We don't want the government going in and saying, we think this guy has spoken too much.
Okay, so now you're equating
That's the very purpose of the First Amendment.
Speech. I mean, these are the two pillars.
Well, sure. Imagine if we couldn't spend any money.
Corporations are people, and money is speech.
Well, imagine if we couldn't spend money. We'd both be off the air right now if they weren't spending money here at Bloomberg.
It is not you and I spending the money.
If we said Bloomberg can't spend money to promote discussion of political topics, they would be out of business.
Thom, let me jump in here and ask you about the future of the doctrine of corporate personhood and how it ties into our campaign finance law system. Whither the way forward? You were tweeting earlier today, and Brad was writing earlier in the week about this new decision that came down from the Montana State Supreme Court dealing with corporate personhood and all these issues. Where are we going to go? I mean, this election is our first instance in the political wild, so to speak, of operating under Citizens United. What do we know at this point?
Well, two things. First, Brad said that because the Supreme Court said it, therefore this should all be possible. I would strongly disagree with that. Secondly, what happened with the Montana Supreme Court is in the Citizens United decision, the Citizens United decision said that the only time that money could be regulated in the political sphere is if you could demonstrate a compelling interest. And the Montana Supreme Court said, okay, you want a demonstration? Here's the list. And they attached a long list of here's how the public interest is damaged by all this corporate money being involved in speech. And so we're going to uphold a 100-year-old law from when the copper barons were basically owned every politician in Montana and ran the political process. And that got kicked out during the Progressive era, and it got upheld by the money got kicked out, and the law that kicked the money out got upheld by the Montana Supreme Court day before yesterday. And I think that that's the first crack in the armor of Citizens United.
Do you think that's going to go to the Supreme Court eventually? Do you think that'll eventually go to the United States Supreme Court?
Of course.
Brad, what do you think?
It'll go to the Supreme Court. It'll go to the Supreme Court and it'll be summarily reversed. One of the things, too, Lee, that you should know is this is not our first election under Citizens United. This is our second election under Citizens United. 2010 was under Citizens United. In 2010, turnout was up from 2006. We had more competitive races than in almost any time in recent memory. We had a more issue-oriented campaign than in almost any time in recent memory. In fact, I would say over the last 3 years, we've had the best public debate about the overall size and scope of federal government. What do we want government to do? Where do we want to go? That we've had since the civil rights era.
We have had
a great
cliche-driven debate.
Well, Tom says cliche debate, but compared to what? Compared to the old regime in 2008 or 2004 or 2000 or 1996?
Compared to prime minister's questions, compared to genuine debate,
those are not questions of campaign finance
to real
law.
debate. I mean, we're having these phony debates on TV where people are given 30, 40 seconds to speak.
But Tom, none of that has changed since Citizens United. I mean, you want to talk about Citizens United.
The reason why that is happening is because people are relying on the heavy lifting of television and radio advertising to carry their message.
Is a constitutional amendment a legislative, I don't want to say solution, but end around some sort of resolution in the offing here? Is Congress going to pass a constitutional amendment getting corporate money out of politics? Brad, let's start with you.
No, they won't, because as soon as they try to, you realize the intractability of that argument. For example, Bernie Sanders' amendment that he has proposed would actually prohibit any group of people, not even incorporated, that promoted business interest from speaking, which reveals the whole game. He just doesn't like business, and he doesn't really care about this corporate personhood stuff. And we're going to see again and again, you can't just say corporations don't have any rights, because that would deprive shareholders of all their rights. It would deprive the citizens who are members of those corporations of their rights. And so the system simply becomes unworkable. You really can't make that work, and Congress isn't going to pass it, and the Supreme Court's going to summarily reverse that Montana decision.
Tom, final word. Is Congress going to act, and are they going to be effective if they do so?
I think eventually. I don't think they're going to act in this election cycle, but the reality is right now, as a consequence of Citizens United and the decisions that preceded it by the Supreme Court, that every member of Congress is spending somewhere between a third and two-thirds of all their time in Washington, D.C. raising money. And Republicans and Democrats equally are disgusted by that process.
All right, gentlemen.
And it's going.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it's going to take a change either to the nature and composition of the Supreme Court or to the Constitution to get that out.
All right, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for coming in today. This was really quite an interesting and spirited debate. If you'd like to learn more about the cases or issues we just discussed, or anything about campaign finance law in general, be sure to check out our offerings on BloombergLaw.com and also on the Bloomberg Terminal. I'm Lee Pacchia. Thanks for watching.